Mark Jensen had worked hundreds of flights in the last 4 years, but something about Flight 779 to Frankfurt felt off. He couldn't explain it, not in any formal way. Maybe it was the air. It carried a quiet tension, like a note being held too long. Passengers boarded as usual, dragging suitcases, complaining about legroom, asking about Wi-Fi. But she, the woman in seat 14C, moved differently. He noticed her the moment she stepped through the jet bridge. She wore plain clothes, jeans, a gray hoodie, and a baseball cap pulled low. Her carry-on was compact, military-grade, and barely left her grip. She kept her eyes down, avoided small talk, and made straight for her seat 14C. Aisle, no bathroom break, no overhead stowage. That alone was strange. Most passengers, especially those on long hauls, either adjusted their luggage or stretched before settling in. Mark wasn't paranoid. He had been an air marshal before taking this flight attendant job. Budget cuts and policy changes pushed him toward civilian work, but the habits never left. His eyes still tracked body language, still caught the micro-expressions of tension, hesitation, panic. Something in this woman's shoulders, tight and alert, didn't say, "Nervous flyer." They said, "Watching everything." He passed by her twice before takeoff, offering drinks. She declined both times, her hands tucked under her tray table. No phone out, no book. Just staring forward, eyes scanning the emergency exit like she was rehearsing. It wasn't fear, it was training. The seat beside her remained empty. She never glanced around. When the safety demo began, she didn't watch the video or feign interest like the others. Instead, she reached up and tapped the side of her hoodie like adjusting an earpiece. Mark caught it in the corner of his eye. Subtle, too subtle. He leaned into the galley where the pilot, Captain Doane Rourke, stood sipping black coffee. Doane had flown over 20 years and took nothing seriously unless it involved crosswinds or whiskey. Mark nodded toward the front. "You notice 14C?" he asked. Doane raised an eyebrow. "You mean hoodie girl? She looks like she's on her way to drop out of art school." "She hasn't blinked in 10 minutes, Mark replied. "Didn't touch her drink. Didn't move when the plane taxied. She's not scared. She's measuring." Doane chuckled, waving it off. "You always think someone's plotting a hijack. Probably just hates flying." Mark frowned. He wasn't sure what irritated him more, Dawn's dismissal, or the fact that he couldn't quite prove his suspicion. But something gnawed at him. 30 minutes into the flight, cruising at 34,000 feet, Mark walked the cabin again. He paused near her row, pretending to check overhead compartments. She was still, but her lips moved, just barely. A whisper, aimed downward toward her sleeve. He leaned ever so slightly. One word made it past the drone of engine hum. "Secure." Mark's breath caught. She hadn't looked up, hadn't acknowledged his presence. Just one word, said softly, into what he now realized wasn't just a hoodie, it was a communication rig. Back in the galley, he accessed the flight's digital manifest. Seat 14C, passenger name, Elena Brooks. Passport issued in New Jersey. Digital check-in, no luggage. The field for booking reference had a red mark. She was added manually less than an hour before departure. That didn't happen. Not without authorization from above. And that wasn't all. Another passenger drew his attention. Seat 2A, first class. Victor Darnell. Airline board member, rarely flew commercial, usually took chartered corporate jets. No security escort, no entourage. Just a navy blue suit and a leather briefcase with silver clasps. Mark remembered greeting him earlier. Darnell hadn't said more than 3 words, but his glance at 14C during boarding had lasted a second too. Long. Mark returned to the galley and leaned against the side counter, arms crossed. He stared out the window into the clouds. He had seen strange passengers before, smugglers, fugitives, even a few federal escorts, but nothing like this. If Elena Brooks was surveillance, then Victor Darnell was the target. But why now? Why? This flight? And why didn't anyone else seem to notice? He pulled out his phone and opened a secure messaging app still installed from his Marshall days. His old partner, Reese, worked at DHS now. Mark typed quickly, Flight 779, female, 30s, gray hoodie, seat 14C, whispering into hidden mic. Added to manifest last minute. Target might be in 2A. He hit send. 30 seconds later, Reese replied, no alerts. Flight's clean, but if you feel something's wrong, trust it. Keep eyes open. That wasn't reassuring. Back in the cabin, turbulence shook the plane slightly. Passengers stirred. Elena remained statue still. Mark walked slowly past again. This time she glanced up. For the briefest second, their eyes locked. Cold, calculating. Then she looked away. Mark's pulse quickened. She had sized him up. He wasn't just watching her anymore. She knew it. And in that quiet moment, between suspicion and confirmation, Mark knew one thing for sure. The woman in 14C wasn't a passenger. She was something else entirely. And this flight was heading toward something much darker than Frankfurt. The hum of the engine settled into a rhythmic lull as Flight 779 soared over the North Atlantic. Cabin lights dimmed, casting a sleepy glow on tired faces and half-finished meals. Most passengers had reclined into silence, lulled into comfort, by the idea that they were safely drifting across the sky. But Mark Jensen couldn't relax. He sat in the galley, staring at the wall, the uneaten sandwich on his tray forgotten. His thoughts circled one thing. Elena Brooks in seat 14C. She hadn't moved in over an hour. No bathroom break, no stretching. Just occasional whispers into her hidden mic. The more Mark watched her, the more convinced he became. She wasn't just surveilling. She was waiting. For what, he wasn't sure. But the pieces didn't feel random. And then, something happened that confirmed his fear. A soft ping from the cockpit signaled an incoming message. The pilot, Don Rourke, looked over the flight control screen and frowned. Reroute, he muttered. Mark looked up. What do you mean, reroute? Don tapped at the interface. New directive just came in. We're being told to divert. Says airspace congestion near Frankfurt. We're being cleared to land in Iceland instead. Keflavik airstrip. That's a military base, Mark said, voice tightening. Don shrugged. It's also an emergency reroute hub. It happens sometimes. Weather shifts, traffic congestion, radar delays. Not uncommon. Mark leaned in. Did air traffic control call? Any live update from the tower? No. It was sent encrypted. Priority flag. That sent ice down Mark's spine. Let me see the message. Don turned the monitor so he could read it. The message had no standard ATC header. No timestamp. No tower code. Just an override command. Flight path update 779. Immediate. Redirect to Keflavik. Contact on ground. Stand by for escort. Underneath. One more line blinked in red. Confidential air cargo list follows. Pilot eyes only. Mark stepped back. That's not a weather diversion. That's a black op reroute. Don rolled his eyes. You and your spy movies again. Mark leaned close, lowering his voice. Don, that woman in 14C, her name was added manually to the manifest. No standard booking code, no checked bags, nothing. And now the reroute comes in with no warning? Someone's running something on this flight, and I think we're just collateral. The pilot's smirk faded slightly, replaced by something like concern. I'll call ATC. Dawn said. No, Mark said. Don't use the open channel. If this is a covert move, they're probably listening. Dawn hesitated, then nodded, walking back into the cockpit with a furrowed brow. Mark's heart pounded. He walked slowly down the aisle again. Passengers were dozing or watching movies. Everything looked normal. But the normalcy only heightened the tension. Like a calm before impact. As he reached row 14, Elena looked up. Their eyes met. This time, she didn't look away. She stared straight at him, with eyes full of calculation, like someone scanning for weaknesses. Mark gave nothing in return. She tapped her mic once more subtly, as if confirming a message had been received. Then, with chilling calm, she turned and looked toward first class, specifically seat 2. Adult Mark followed her gaze. Victor Darnell, airline board member, sat sipping club soda with lemon, reading a report on a sleek tablet. To everyone else, he was a suit with status. But Mark could see something else. The locked briefcase at his feet, the tight look around his eyes, the way he checked his watch 3 times in 1 minute. Darnell wasn't just another passenger. He was nervous. Watching 2. Mark returned to the galley and opened the cabin manifest again. This time, he cross-checked timestamps. Darnell had been confirmed early that morning. But Elena Brooks 4C was logged into the system 45 minutes before takeoff. Cleared by an executive code, one Mark recognized. It belonged to Corporate Security Division 6, which was never used for civilian manifests. He took a breath and clicked the crew alert. Tab, Internal System. Unauthorized passenger logged. Potential security breach. Request flag for DHS response. On landing. But before he could hit send, the screen flickered. A new message appeared. Abort alert. Do not engage. Flight under active. Surveillance. Pilot and crew to stand down or face federal penalties. Mark's fingers froze. Someone, somewhere, was watching their internal system. This flight wasn't just being rerouted. It was being managed remotely. He rushed back to the cockpit. Dawn looked pale, hand frozen over the control panel. You saw it? Mark asked. Dawn nodded slowly. We're being watched. Then we're not in control anymore. Mark said, this is their operation, and we're just the delivery system. Dawn stood, jaw clenched. Then let's find out who's flying this thing for real. Without another word, Dawn marched out of the cockpit and down the aisle toward row 14. Passengers stirred. Some looked up from movies, confused by the sudden movement of the captain. When he reached Elena's seat, Dawn leaned in. I want to see identification, he said. Elena looked up, dead calm. You don't have jurisdiction, she replied. I'm the pilot of this aircraft, and right now, this is my sky. Show me ID. She reached into her hoodie, slowly, and pulled out a flat steel case. It snapped open to reveal a silver badge and a federal seal. U.S. Homeland Security, Covert Operations. Division. Dawn blinked. This real? You don't want to find out the hard way, she said. Something in Dawn snapped. He grabbed the badge and bent it with one hand. It folded flimsy metal. Fake, he hissed, and without warning, he slapped her hard across the face. Gasped. Elena's head turned with the force, but she didn't flinch. She slowly faced him again, one cheek red, eyes fierce. You just assaulted a federal agent mid-flight, she said. And that was the moment everyone on Flight 779 realized. She wasn't just a passenger. A suffocating silence settled over the cabin after the slap. Mark stood frozen, watching Elena steady herself like it hadn't happened. The passengers nearby gawked. A child began to cry somewhere in the back. Elena adjusted her hoodie, looked calmly at the pilot, and said again, more firmly, You just assaulted a federal operative. Captain Doan Rourke's face turned red, but not from guilt. From confusion, from fear, from suddenly realizing that maybe, just maybe, he had stepped into something far bigger than himself. Mark stepped between them quickly. "Doan, back off," he said. "You need to get back to the cockpit. Now." Doan hesitated and stormed off, muttering, "She's bluffing." Mark turned to Elena. "Tell me who you are. I need the truth." She didn't blink. "I told you. I'm with Homeland Security, Covert Division. My mission was flagged. You're not supposed to be involved." "You weren't on the manifest," he replied. "Not originally. You were added manually, 45 minutes before we took off." Elena nodded once. "Because the target showed up early. Victor Darnell? Exactly?" Mark's mind spun. "He's an airline executive. Why is Homeland after him?" Elena leaned in. Her voice dropped low. "He's been selling security access codes. Flight paths, crew schedules, maintenance gaps. To foreign defense firms. Maybe even enemies. We've been tracing him for months. We finally got confirmation he'd board this flight with a drive containing everything." Mark's breath caught. "You mean there's classified data on this flight?" "There's enough to compromise multiple international airports and high-profile officials." Mark stepped back, heart pounding. This wasn't a hijacking. It was a sting. "But that meant you're not here to arrest him, are you?" He asked. "No," she replied coldly. "I'm here to keep him alive and make sure the right people get what's on that drive." "Keep him alive?" "That's right. Not everyone wants him taken in." Mark glanced around the cabin. Suddenly, every face looked suspicious. "You think there's a hit team on this flight?" "There usually is," she said flatly. "Two men, posing as marshals or passengers, or maybe even crew. Their orders are to intercept the drive, eliminate the asset, and vanish before we land." Mark's mouth went dry. "Do you know who they are?" She shook her head. "Not yet, but we're running out of time. Iceland's not our real destination. They rerouted the flight to remove me. I'm compromised." Mark felt the ground shifting. Under his feet, the woman he thought was suspicious turned out to be the only person telling the truth. And now they were hurtling toward a military base, under orders from a system being manipulated by someone behind the scenes. "How do I know?" "You're legit?" he asked finally. Elena pulled out a small, flat device like a key fob. She tapped it twice, then held it to his ear. A voice came through. "Mark Jensen, badge ID 122 Lima, former air marshal, trained under Agent Reese Douglas, 2018. Mark stiffened. "Who is this?" The voice replied, "You're being looped into a Level 7 clearance operation. The woman beside you is Agent Elena Brooks. She's acting under direct order of Homeland's off-book intelligence wing. Stand down and assist. If you obstruct, you'll be detained." "Understood?" The line cut. Mark looked at her, stunned. That was my old partner's voice. Elena nodded once. "Now do you believe me?" He swallowed. "What do you need?" She glanced again toward first class. "Victor has the drive. It's either on him or in that briefcase. We need to secure it before someone else makes a move." "I'll distract him," Mark said. "You get ready." Before she could answer, the lights flickered. Then came the overhead announcement from Doan Rourke's voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to congestion in Frankfurt, we'll be making a short stop in Iceland. We'll resume our flight shortly after refueling. Please remain seated and calm." This is purely procedural. Mark and Elena locked eyes. "That's the signal," she whispered. "What signal?" "They're preparing to extract him during refuel and kill anyone in the way." Elena stood. Mark grabbed her arm. "You'll spook them if you move now." She nodded. "Then go. Intercept Victor. Say anything. Keep him from standing. Mark took a breath and headed to the front. His legs felt heavy, like walking through water. He passed rows of drowsy passengers, unaware they were flying through a federal chess match. When he reached first class, Victor Darnell looked up from his tablet. He smiled faintly. "Mark, right?" Victor said smoothly. "Is there a problem?" "Just checking in," Mark replied. "There's been a seat reassignment. We may need to shift you briefly during the stop. Would you mind moving to business class for the next segment?" Victor raised an eyebrow. "I paid for this seat." Mark forced a grin. "And you'll get double miles for the trouble." Victor didn't laugh. Instead, he adjusted his briefcase and said, "Fine, but I'll need to keep this with me." "Of course," Mark replied. Back in economy, Elena spotted two men seated several rows apart stand up simultaneously. They didn't speak. They just looked at each other once, nodded, and began walking, one toward the rear galley, one toward first class. Elena's heart jumped. She whispered into her collar, "They're moving." Mark turned to see one of the men heading toward him, hand casually tucked inside his jacket. Then the second man in the rear pulled a sidearm from under his coat, pointed it at Elena, and said just one word, "Don't." The entire cabin erupted in screams. Elena moved faster than anyone could track, launching herself into the aisle dot. And in that moment, Mark understood. This wasn't just a security breach. This was a kill mission. And Flight 779 was flying straight through it. Chaos spread like wildfire. Screams pierced the cabin as passengers ducked behind seats, some reaching for overhead bins in panic, others frozen where they sat. The man aiming at Elena kept a perfect grip, military style, both hands forward. Elbows tight, trigger steady. But he'd made a mistake. He assumed she'd hesitate. She didn't. Elena dropped low, rolled across the narrow aisle, and kicked up hard, connecting her foot with the wrist holding the weapon. The gun flew back and clattered to the floor. Mark, still in first class, spun to see the second man now pulling his weapon, aiming squarely at Victor. "Gun!" Mark shouted. He lunged out. His body crashed into the man just as the trigger clicked. The shot went high, shattering a window panel, but missing Victor by inches. The cabin pressure howled. Oxygen masks dropped. Someone fainted. The man struggled beneath Mark, elbowing him hard in the ribs, but Mark didn't let go. His training kicked in. Grip the arm, twist the wrist, drop the weapon dot behind him. Victor dived to the floor, covering his briefcase with his body. Mark fought hard or got in economy. Elena had already taken the first attacker down, slamming his head against the seatback until he went limp. She retrieved the pistol, tucked it into her waistband, then scanned the cabin. More screaming, more confusion. But one thing was clear. The pilot had disappeared. She sprinted toward the cockpit, stepping over a stunned flight attendant and two trembling passengers. Mark yelled behind her, "Get control!" When she reached the cockpit, the door was unlocked another. Red flag. Captain Doan Rourke sat inside, headset on, calmly flipping switches. He looked over his shoulder and smirked. "You're too late," he said. Elena stepped inside and aimed the pistol at his head. "Stand up. Hands where I can see them." He didn't move. "You think this is your show?" "I was told to comply with every order. The moment you boarded, this flight stopped being mine." Elena took a step closer. "You assaulted a federal agent. You let two armed killers board. And now you're rerouting this plane under false pretense. You're going to jail." Doan laughed dryly. "I was given a choice: fly the plane and keep my career, or resist and be buried in red tape. I made mine. You're not getting off this flight with that drive." "Who gave you the order?" She snapped. He looked up at her, eyes dark. "Same people who put you on this mission. You think you're working for the government? You're working for a system. One with layers you don't even know exist. She cocked the pistol. That's the difference between us. I don't follow blindly. Mark's voice came through the cabin speaker, slightly breathless. Cockpit secure? I've got both suspects restrained? Victor is safe. Elena pressed the intercom. Affirmative. We need to change course. Cancel the Iceland landing. Dawn's face twisted. If you reroute, they'll shoot us down. She looked at him. Let them try. Then she pulled him from the seat and shoved him into the corner, zip-tying his wrists with a strip from the emergency kit. He didn't resist. He just smiled. You're playing a game you can't win, he whispered. I'm not playing. She replied, sitting in the pilot's seat. She flicked a switch and contacted the U.S. military. Channel 1 only elite operatives could access. This is Agent Elena Brooks. Authorization 6 Zulu 9. Flight 779 has been compromised. 2 internal threats neutralized. Civilian target secured. Rerouting to Andrews Air Force Base. Repeat, Andrews Air Force Base. Transmitting encryption handshake now. She entered a code .silence. Then a voice came through. Confirmed. Course change accepted. Fighter support en route. Maintain altitude. You are no longer alone. Relief hit her like a wave, but only for a second. Doan chuckled behind her. They'll never let you land. Not with what's on that drive. She ignored him. Back in the cabin, Mark was helping a mother with 2 kids retrieve oxygen masks. Blood stained his shirt from the struggle, but his hands didn't shake. He had acted on instinct and survived. Elena reappeared minutes later. Breath controlled, eyes sharp. The plane is ours now, she said quietly. We're going home. Mark nodded. He tried to shoot Darnell. The others were pretending to be marshals. The whole thing was planned. He was never supposed to make it back to use soil, she confirmed. Someone very powerful paid to make sure he didn't. Mark looked at the frightened passengers. You think they understand what just happened? They'll be told. It was turbulence, a mechanical fault, maybe an unruly passenger. No one will ever mention the drive or the hit team. Then what happens to him? Elena looked toward Victor, who was now handcuffed to the seat frame, eyes lowered, briefcase. Between his feet, he goes into federal custody. Deep custody. If the data on that drive is what we think it is, 6 industries will crumble, and a few governments may lose their sleep. Mark exhaled, wiping sweat from his brow. So that's it? Elena gave a faint smile. That was only the first round. Mark asked the question burning in his mind since the slap. Why didn't you stop him before he hit you? Elena turned to him slowly. Because if I'd reacted, I would have revealed myself too early. I needed him to show the crew his weakness. A pilot who strikes a woman under pressure. That gets noticed. That gets logged. Now he's out of the system for good. Mark blinked. You set that up? She nodded. Every piece counts in a long game. And with that, she walked back to the cockpit as the cabin slowly calmed. Flight 779 was no longer flying blind, it was flying straight into classified skies. The cabin was calming down, but the energy had shifted. A kind of stillness that follows a storm. Lights flickered overhead, and an occasional whimper or cough cut through the heavy silence. Mark moved quickly through the aisles, checking on passengers, keeping his voice steady and calm. A few had minor injuries. The shattered window panel had been patched with emergency sealant. No depressurization occurred miraculously. In first class, Victor Darnell sat motionless, cuffed to the frame of his seat. He hadn't said a word. Since the second attacker was subdued, his face held no panic, no regret, just cold calculation. The kind of expression Mark had only seen on people who knew how the system worked because they had helped build it. Elena returned from the cockpit, with a satchel strapped tightly across, her body and a fire in her step. Secure the briefcase. She told Mark. He looked down at the sleek leather case tucked under Victor's feet. You think the drive is in there? He asked. It has to be, she replied. We've intercepted messages between his contact and a second party. That drive was going to be traded. The fake marshals weren't just here to kill him. They were also supposed to extract it. Mark crouched and carefully pulled the briefcase into the aisle. No visible locks. He flipped it over. A thin piece of black tape was stuck beneath. Carefully, he peeled it away. What he found underneath chilled him. A USB drive, taped alongside. A spare pistol magazine. Elena, he said, holding it up. She grabbed it, examined the drive, and nodded. That's it. This confirms everything. Data smuggled under federal noses, hand-delivered by someone who dines with senators. Victor finally looked up. You don't know what you're holding, he said, voice low. No, Elena said. But I know what you're not holding anymore. He smirked. That's not my only copy. We know, she replied. Mark caught her eye. Then what's the plan? Elena pointed to the rear galley. There's a secure locker in the emergency kit. I'm storing this there until we land. I don't trust anyone on this plane except you. Mark nodded and started walking with her, but something caught his eye. A man near the emergency exit stood and stretched in a way that seemed unnatural. His hands moved slowly to his waistband. The same kind of slow, practiced motion Mark had seen before, when someone was trying not to draw attention while preparing to strike. Mark touched Elena's arm. Third one. Her eyes snapped toward the man. Without hesitation, she shoved the drive into her pocket and moved. Before the man could draw anything, she closed the distance and tackled him sideways into the lavatory door. A short grunt escaped his lips, followed by the thud of something metallic hitting the floor. Passengers screamed again. Someone shouted, "Gun!" The plane rocked with turbulence at the worst moment. Mark rushed forward and scooped the weapon another. Suppressed handgun, this one engraved with a tactical seal. Elena punched the man once, twice, until his arms went limp. She looked at Mark, breathing hard. He was on standby. A failsafe. They brought a backup in case the other two failed. Mark muttered, "They always do." Elena zip-tied the man to a seat armrest, while Mark locked the new weapon in a cabinet. He didn't even bother asking how they'd smuggled it through security. That part didn't matter now. What mattered was that this operation had gone far. Beyond any sanctioned federal sting dot, this was a layered ambush, built to look like a clean extraction. Everything had been designed to keep Victor's secrets from ever reaching the ground. Mark stood beside Elena, both of them watching the unconscious third man slump against the seat. You think there's a fourth? He asked quietly. She shook her head. No, if there were, I'd already be dead. Mark believed her. Back at 2A, Victor tilted his head slightly, as if amused by the failure unfolding around him. Elena walked up and leaned close. You underestimated who was watching. Victor shrugged. You underestimated who's protecting me. She stared at him. That protection is gone. You've been flagged by 6 agencies. You'll spend the rest of your life in a box so deep underground, no one will remember you existed. You'll never be able to use that data, he replied. If you try, people far above your clearance will bury the truth again. Then we'll keep digging, she said, and turned away. Mark stood near the curtain between first class and economy, still processing the third attacker. The hidden drive, the cold game of survival they were now a part of. Elena, he said suddenly. How did they know which flight to target? She hesitated. Her silence said everything. They didn't just pick this plane, he continued. They were waiting. Someone on the inside told them which flight you were on. Her lips tightened. There's a leak. possibly in DHS, possibly higher. Mark cursed under his breath. Then we're not just dealing with 3 hitmen. She nodded. We're dealing with a government war inside the sky. He looked toward the passengers, still shaken, still unaware of how close they had come to death. Then he looked out the window out in the distance. 2 black fighter jets flanked the plane, holding position just beneath the clouds. Escort had arrived. Elena returned to the cockpit and took the comm. This is Flight 779. Security threat neutralized. Package secured. Final approach confirmed. Request landing clearance at Andrews Air Force Base. The voice returned, calm and direct. Cleared to land. Prepare for military escort to secure zone. Mark sat in the jump seat across from the young cockpit, sweat cooling on his neck. He looked at Elena, who hadn't blinked once since buckling in. You ever fly a flight like this before? He asked. She turned to him. Not even close, she said, and the plane began to descend, carrying the weight of buried secrets. No one was supposed to survive. The plane was descending, but the storm wasn't over. Mark sat strapped in, gripping the armrest as the aircraft leveled for its final approach. The cabin buzzed with confusion. Passengers whispered, some asked questions, but the crew stuck to protocol. Please remain seated. Everything is under control. No one mentioned guns, rogue agents, or the masked man Elena had knocked out near the lavatory. But everyone knew something was very wrong. In the cockpit, the co-pilot, Lieutenant Roy Hadley, kept a calm hand on the throttle. He'd taken over the flight after the captain was confined for slapping Elena. The man had been locked in the crew rest quarters, red-faced and ranting about betrayal. Elena made sure he was monitored. Beside Roy, Elena now sat in the observer. Jump seat, headset on, approach vector locked. Escort holding. Confirm landing protocol at secure hangar. A voice from the tower replied, confirmed. Andrews AFB runway 3, military police on standby. Behind the cockpit curtain, Mark joined her, his eyes locked on the clouds parting outside. We're almost down, he said, half to reassure himself. Elena didn't look away. Landing is easy. What happens after is war? Mark leaned in. I need to know. That drive, what's on it? Elena hesitated, then finally pulled the USB from her vest. Names, routes, ghost contracts. 37 airlines involved in. Off-record cargo drops. Weapon components disguised as commercial freight. Diplomats looking the other way. And Victor, he's the bridge. He built the data tunnels and sold access to offshore buyers. Some of those buyers are government-backed. Mark exhaled hard. And they were willing to crash a commercial jet to protect it? They almost did. Suddenly, the plane jolted outside. One of the escort fighters peeled upward violently. In the next instant, a red alarm on the cockpit panel flashed. Missile lock, the co-pilot shouted. What? Mark turned. Repeat. We're being locked. Roy barked. Elena was already up, storming toward the avionics panel. That's not possible, she said, eyes darting. This is a secure airspace. Mark's blood went cold. Unless someone inside gave clearance. The cockpit speakers came alive. A distorted voice echoed. Divert, or you will be neutralized. The co-pilot's face drained. That's not an official channel. Elena grabbed the backup radio. This is Federal Agent Elena Rivas. Flight 779 is under U.S. military escort and authorized for secure landing. Identify yourself immediately. No answer. Mark yanked open the overhead panel and scanned the indicators. That's a civilian spoof, he said. Someone's using a private drone to trigger military responses. It's a bluff. Elena turned. Are you sure? Only one way to find out. She gritted her teeth, then looked at Roy. Maintain current descent. He hesitated, then nodded. Copy that. The warning lights continued for 30 more seconds, then vanished. The tension in the cockpit didn't. Elena exhaled slowly. They're desperate. Mark replied, we must be getting close to someone powerful. Down in first class, Victor leaned his head back and laughed. You won't make it to the runway, he muttered to no one. Mark re-entered the cabin, standing directly over him. You just tried to shoot down your own plane. How many lives are worth your secrets? Victor smirked. There's no such thing as innocence at 35,000 feet. Elena joined them, eyes locked on his. You think this ends with a crash or an arrest? It doesn't. This ends with every journalist in the country seeing what's on that drive. Victor laughed harder. You don't get it. Journalists won't touch this. They'll call it fake, doctored. The truth doesn't matter. What matters is who says it first and louder. Mark's fists tightened. Elena put a hand on his shoulder. He wants a reaction. Don't give it to him. Suddenly, an announcement came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we are beginning our final descent. Please remain in your seats and fasten your seatbelts. Below, the massive runways of Andrews Air Force Base came into view. Black SUVs and armed trucks lined the tarmac. A mobile command unit waited beside a marked tent with federal insignias. Mark whispered, they came in force. Elena said, they don't know who to trust either. The plane touched down with a firm bounce. Everyone clapped out of instinct, but the tension didn't break. As they taxied, military police flanked both sides. Soldiers boarded as soon as the wheels stopped. Elena raised both hands and stepped forward. Federal agent. Package is secured. 2 attackers restrained. 1 hostile detained in crew quarters. A female commander approached. We're aware. You'll come with us. All 3 of you? Mark looked puzzled. 3? She nodded. Pilot, agent, and you. Mark blinked. I'm not a federal officer. Doesn't matter. You're part of the incident. You're on the record now. Victor chuckled in his seat. Elena turned to Mark and whispered, from here on, nothing is off the record. He nodded. Then let's say everything. The drive was handed over. Victor was loaded into a black vehicle. Mark and Elena were placed in a separate one. As the convoy rolled off the runway, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the tarmac. Mark stared ahead. This doesn't end with a landing, he said. Elena nodded. It starts now. The SUV carrying Mark and Elena turned off the main runway and rolled toward a secluded building marked only by a steel security gate and 2 armed guards. Andrews Air Force Base had many secrets, but this one wasn't on any map. Its entrance opened slowly, revealing a reinforced elevator beyond a biometric scanner and blast doors. Inside, Mark's heart pounded. He had worked around the edges of classified operations, but nothing like this. Elena sat still, arms crossed, as the elevator hummed downward deeper than he'd thought possible beneath a military base. They call it the vault, Elena said. Finally, this is where truths either get buried or unleashed. When the elevator doors slid open, they entered a room glowing with pale blue lights and walls lined with secure terminals. Waiting for them were 2 people. One, a silver-haired woman in a black suit with a cold stare. The other, a man with a shaved head, wearing a Homeland Security badge and a scowl. Elena Rivas, the woman said without moving. You're not dead. Disappointed? Elena replied dryly. The man motioned to a table. Sit, both of you. Mark hesitated. I'm not part of our operation. You're part of it now, the woman cut in. Mark sat, jaw clenched. Elena placed the USB drive on the table. The man plugged it into a shielded port. For several seconds, the screen filled with names, transaction codes, flight paths, and encrypted files. Then the woman spoke again. You understand what this contains? Elena nodded. Enough to dismantle 3 covert shipping corridors, implicate half a dozen corporations, and link Victor Darnell directly to unauthorized arms transfers. The woman didn't flinch. And you think exposing this will help? Mark leaned forward. People deserve to know. The man scoffed. People can't even handle gas prices without rioting. You think they're ready for this? No. Elena said, eyes cold. But they're ready to see who's been lying. The woman turned her gaze to Mark. You, civilian, flight crew. Why didn't you walk away? He exhaled. Because I knew she wasn't a regular passenger. Because I trusted my gut. Because people like Victor treat the truth like cargo. You can lose it mid-air, and no one ever files a report. Silence fell. Then the man said, we need to authenticate this. If even half of it's real, you've just lit a fire we can't contain. Then burn it all, Elena said. An assistant entered, handing the woman a tablet. Her face hardened. News just broke, she said. Anonymous leak. Someone posted a dump of flight manifests and falsified customs logs. Code names. Match what's on this drive. Mark looked at Elena. She looked stunned. I didn't leak it, she said. The man cursed under his breath. Then who the hell did? The answer came quickly. The vault's intercom buzzed. Alert. External breach detected. Lobby entrance compromised. Suddenly, the room plunged into lockdown. Red lights flashed. Steel doors slammed shut. There. Here, Elena said. Someone doesn't want this confirmed. The woman turned to a console. Who's attacking? An AI feed pulled up camera footage. 5 men in tactical gear, faces hidden, storming through the corridors. Armed, precise. Not looters, professionals. The woman pulled a pistol from beneath the desk. You 2 move to the secondary exit. We'll hold them here. Elena grabbed Mark's hand. Come on, back through the lower level. As they ran, the alarms shrieked louder. A nearby blast echoed behind them. Dust fell from the ceiling. Is this still normal for you? Mark shouted. Only on Thursdays. Elena muttered. They reached a narrow corridor marked maintenance access only. Elena slammed her palm on the scanner. A service hatch opened. They dropped into a tunnel barely tall enough to stand. Mark's voice trembled. This is insane. They're willing to kill to stop what's already out there. They're not here to stop the leak, Elena said. They're here to erase us. Mark stared. Because we can prove it's real. They emerged in a utility chamber behind a hangar. Somewhere above, engines roared. Another convoy had arrived. They crept along the wall, staying low. Elena peeked. Around the corner. Black vans, she said. No tags. Private mercs. Probably hired by the same people Victor was working for. Mark clenched his fists. Then we run? No, Elena said. We deliver the evidence. In person. 2. Who? She looked at him. You used to work Homeland Air Marshal Detail. You still know Reese? Mark blinked. Yeah, but he's clean. We get to him. He gets this to Congress, not just the media. Mark nodded. Okay, let's end this. They ran for the far gate. Behind them, chaos consumed the base. But ahead, just beyond the fence, a new fight was waiting. Mark and Elena sprinted across the edge of Andrews Air Force Base, ducking behind fuel tanks and grounded cargo pallets. The night air was hot and heavy, filled with the distant echo of alarms and short bursts of gunfire. Elena checked her pistol as they neared the eastern gate. Mark held the drive tight in his fist, like a flame someone might snatch at any moment. Elena, he gasped, we can't outrun them forever. We're not, she said, eyes scanning the perimeter. We're going straight through. Beyond. The chain-link fence, a black sedan rolled to a stop. The driver got out gray suit, bald head, clean-shaven. He looked both ways, then raised a single hand. Elena signaled back. "That's Reese?" Mark asked. "Yes," she said. "And he's risking his clearance being here." Gunfire cracked behind them. Mark turned to see two masked operatives emerging from a storage bay. No words, no warnings, just weapons drawn. "Move!" Elena shouted. They ran, bullets chewing the gravel behind them. Reese opened the gate manually, waving them through. Elena pushed Mark forward and spun, dropping one of the gunmen with two fast shots. The other dived for cover as the trio disappeared into the night. Inside the sedan, Reese floored it. "What the hell is happening?" He demanded. Elena passed him the USB drive. "Everything you suspected about the rogue air corridors, Victor. The contractors, it's all on here." Reese stared at it, knuckles tightening. "Do you know what this could do to half the Defense Council?" "I'm counting on it," she replied. Mark sat in the back, still catching his breath. "You're not just delivering it to Congress." "Are you?" "No," Reese said. "I'm delivering it to a live camera. It'll be broadcast before they can suppress it." Mark leaned forward. "Do it now. There's no more time." Reese nodded once and made a call. "Patch me through. Secure line." No delays. 30 minutes later, they entered a broadcast station in northwest D.C., not far from the Capitol. Reese flashed his credentials, bypassing security. The newsroom was buzzing with rumors and half-stories about the breach at Andrews. No one had the full picture. Until now. In a control room filled with blinking monitors. Reese stood in front of a national anchor already prepping for the late segment. "Interrupt programming," he said calmly. "We're going live with this." Within moments, the screens around them blinked, and the newsroom fell silent as a countdown started. 3, 2, 1. The anchor's voice came through. "This is a special report. Tonight, a stunning development one, involving federal airspace, government corruption, and a data leak too explosive to ignore." On the screen, footage began to roll. Encrypted flight logs, Victor's coded contracts, names of private security firms, and photographs of components disguised as ordinary cargo. Then, Elena stepped into frame. "I'm Special Agent Elena Rivas," she said, face steady, voice clear. And this is what they tried to bury. In the shadows of the room, Mark watched. Reese stood beside him, arms crossed. All across America, the truth was pouring out. Within 10 minutes, social media caught fire. Hashtags spread like flames. The phone lines of government offices lit up. Screenshots, video clips, accusations, it all went viral in seconds. And in a dark cell at Andrews, Victor Darnell smiled faintly as guards approached. "It's out, isn't it?" he asked. The lead agent gave no reply. Victor chuckled. "Hood, let the world burn." Back at the station, the broadcast ended, but the momentum had only begun. Mark leaned against the wall, exhausted. Elena approached him. "It's done." He looked at her. "No, it started." In the weeks that followed, hearings were called. Investigations launched. Several high-ranking officials resigned. Others were arrested. Victor was charged under federal espionage statutes, and his offshore accounts were frozen. The public demanded transparency. For once, the government responded. Mark didn't return to his old route. He didn't return to flying at all. Instead, he wrote. His first article, "A Passenger in 4C," went viral in under 2 hours. Not because it exposed secrets, but because it told the truth. The human truth. About courage, instinct, and listening to that inner voice when something feels wrong. Elena disappeared from public view. She was offered a promotion. head of a new interagency unit overseeing cargo integrity and high-risk manifests. She took it, but with conditions. No buried files, no untraceable flights, and full civilian oversight. 6 months later, Mark received a plain envelope with no return address. Inside was a photo. Elena on a tarmac somewhere in Eastern Europe, wearing a parka, smiling at a stray dog. On the back, she'd written, "Still flying. Just a different kind of flight." Mark smiled and placed it on his desk. Somewhere above, a plane cut across the sky. He didn't look up. He just kept writing.